Good evening and welcome back. Christian pastor arrested for making homophobic statements after preaching from the Bible says he was treated shamefully and was doing what his job description says. So, of course, in this world of tolerance when it comes to the LGBTQAIIP plus and all that community, that if you were to say something that goes against that in any semblance or form, then of course it suddenly becomes a hate incident, because in the world of tolerating everybody, that can only be accepted if there is incredible intolerance. Yes, funny bit of irony there, but nonetheless, if somebody wishes to speak out and mention their own opinion based on their beliefs, then that is an act of intolerance. So, what was it precisely that the gentleman here said? Well, this was in relation to quoting the Bible, and that the purpose of humans, envisioned in the image of God, is to further the human race, essentially, and it is therefore obligatory for a man and a woman to be married and have children in order to further their genetics. That is the idea. So given that you need a man and a woman in order to have children, then of course having a homosexual relationship, whether that be lesbian or gay, it is unfeasible to be able to have children between those two partners. So the message from the pastor here was not to try and say that it shouldn't be allowed, but was instead to try and further his opinion based on the Bible, of course, and to say, hey, this is what the Bible teaches, and this is what I believe, this is what I strongly encourage in order for you to have a happy life and to, of course, not sin in the eyes of God, as so I see it. So perhaps this might be something worth considering. And the wonderful thing about Christianity is, of course, that the punishment, the retribution, the judgment is not to be enacted here on earth. Instead, it is to be done in the afterlife. Which is to say, if a Christian thinks that what you're doing is sinful and immoral and wrong, it is not down to that Christian to cast judgment against you. Instead, it is down to them in order to try and save you and get you to ask for forgiveness from God. But that is the extent of their actions from Jesus' teaching. So, the point is, of course, to proselytize and enlighten, as they say, but not to force you to change your ways. That is not the way. That, of course, there is a dichotomy between determinism and free will, especially when it comes to a omniscient, omnipresent God, who, of course, concurrently is supposedly omnibenevolent as well. But the point is that it is not down to other fallible human beings to force you to change your ways, but instead to try and enlighten you and persuade you to adopt their ways of living in order for you to seek recompense the way that they view it. So that is entirely what Douglas here was trying to do, as John Sherwood, 71, was led away in handcuffs, questioned in a police station and held overnight after being accused of making homophobic comments outside Uxbridge Station in West London. The grandfather claimed he was left bruised after police pulled him from a mini stepladder he was using and cuffed his hands behind his back. Now, the defence is, of course, that what he was doing was legal, given freedom of speech. The only issue is, of course, that even with speakers' corners in Hyde Park, freedom of speech does not exist in the UK. The laws are not defended by any constitution, and instead they are actually quite easily changed due to the governmental desires of the day. So we do not have any written constitution like that in order to defend our rights. People do like to point to the Magna Carta, but that is not really legally admissible. It is in some very, very, very rare occasions, but for the vast majority of us, no. Due to essentially abrogation, the latest laws supersede the older laws, and sure, you can reference the Magna Carta, but you're not really going to get anywhere when it comes to law. Your best bet in that case would be jury nullification, but again, of course, if any jury knows what that is, then they are not allowed to be on a jury duty, and it's not as if we have the same system as America anyway. So even then, your chances are negligible. So, with all that in mind, what does it mean? Well, of course it means that it is a cultural shift. That laws are irrelevant if they're not enforced. And the only reason that they are enforced is because we allow them to be enforced. The government is nothing without the people. And all the time that the people allow such things to continue, then of course they are going to continue. In which case the way to stop it is to insist that no, you've crossed your line now, and we are not going to accept you to do any more. And there were passers-by, of course, at the time with the police saying, no, don't do that. But, of course, they weren't very enthused in their response to try and prevent it from happening. And do understand that I'm not trying to go down the insurrection route, I really am not. But, the point of the police, as put out by Peel initially, of course, was that it was consent of the governed. What that means is that the police should not act in a way which goes against what the people who they're protecting are trying to achieve. So, I know across the pond we've seen things like the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, CHAZ, moving on from the occupied protest of CHOP in Minneapolis. And so, of course, when they didn't allow their responders and emergency services into their place, and so people died, then it's fair to say that that is what the people wanted, and therefore that is the consequences of their actions. So, that is the way in order to try and make these principles universal, that if that particular locality does not wish for your presence, who are you to say that you know better? Well, you don't. So if people vote for their own demise and support their own demise, then at some point you've just got to let them fall. That also means, flip side, that if we decide that we wish for things to be a particular way and we're not harming anybody, and we're simply choosing who we wish to freely associate with, then you better off leave us to it. And the same goes here. So when the police officers came to arrest this gent, it's like, well, hey, we're not fussed. We're actually completely fine with this going on. How's about you stay out of it? Then that is the kind of response which I would have been expecting from any self-respecting member of the British public. But of course, when it comes down to Uxbridge in London, how much of Britain are you actually going to find there? So this is not supposed to be a complete support of Christian teachings, as you will know that there are parts that I disagree with. However, when it comes to the simple active expression of speaking your desires out there, then yes, please do, let it be known. And believe it or not, the same goes to other religions, whether that be Buddhism, Islam or Judaism. Either way, let your message be known. Actually, allow people to quote from your holy book and enlighten people about it. Actually allow more information out for people to make their own decisions. And, if we find that a particular teaching isn't lawful, as obviously this one was, but if there's one that isn't lawful, then you've definitely got a bigger conversation to have. But when it comes down to just saying, here is what I suggest, and there are no threats there relevant whatsoever, then yes, that is definitely only speech. And there was, of course, a good point when it comes to the Queen's inauguration from 1952, I believe, when she swore to uphold the values of the Bible. 1953, sorry. Coronation oath in 1953, with the Bible in her hand, that she swore to uphold the principles of the Bible. And, of course, she is the law of the land. It is the Crown Prosecution Service, after all, CPS, that you would surely envision that, as she is the final say when it comes to these laws, and her being a Christian herself, then there should be far more defence when it comes to such preaching and proselytising in the street. So she is a lovely figurehead, and I certainly do admire her wisdom. But some of the time, you got to think, maybe there's more she could be doing. Maybe. But that's it for me, so let me know what you guys think down below with regards to this. Was John doing anything which was particularly provocative? Is there a way of which you can try to destroy his argument in a way that is still universally applicable, in a way that if it was done to the rest of us, we wouldn't like it. I'm very, very intrigued to know, as far as this is concerned, it is just suggestions, attempted persuasion, and just speech at the end of the day. So yeah, somebody might say something I'm not a fan of, but I would just think they are deluded, not that they are a threat. But let me know down below. I was intrigued to hear what you guys have to say, and of course, as always, until next time, have a good one.